Hey everyone, Talon Paul here again with the Bible in 7 stages. This week we will be talking about the nation of Israel. Now, the nation of Israel is important because that takes up the entire Old Testament from Genesis to Malachi. So the entire Old Testament is about how this nation of Israel got started and documents their entire history. So this first video, I will talk about the first half of this nation's history. Now to recap on the first two videos. Remember that God created this nice creation. It's all good. He created the earth and he put mankind ahead of it to rule over it on his behalf. And then they disobey him. And so everything about God's good creation starts to fall apart because his representatives don't do their job and listen to him. They want to do things their own way. And we see that today where everything's falling apart all the time. Things aren't what God would call good anymore. In fact, things afterwards, after this event in Genesis 3, things only start to get worse. From Genesis 4 through 11, you see that mankind starts murdering each other. They start killing each other off. There's even a story about angels coming down and mating with humans and creating these awful beings. And it's just strange. But the fact remains, God's creation is getting worse. In fact, it gets so bad that God eventually decides he's going to flood the earth and start over again with one man and his family. We don't get that story in Sunday school when we're little. We just hear about the animals and how cute and adorable it is. But the reality is God flooded the earth and killed off mankind because they were so bad. The sad part is even Noah's family starts to fall away from him too. And so leading up to the nation of Israel, God is searching around for this one person, somebody that's going to obey him, somebody that's going to listen and be faithful to him. And that's where we come to this man named Abraham. In Genesis chapter 12, God calls him out from his land and says, go to a land that I will show you. So Abraham follows God. Abraham leaves everything behind so he can go to a land that God will show him. And so God promises him 3 things because of this obedience. He promises him land. He promises him descendants and nations are going to come from this man and a relationship with this God. In Genesis 17, 1 through 8, you can see all 3 of these things there. And so what happens is God promises to Abraham all these things. And so Abraham starts to have a family. Abraham starts to have descendants. And that's where the nation of Israel comes from. If you look at this family tree of Abraham's, it's roughly about what the biblical records hold true. You come down to this man named Jacob, which is his grandson, who's later named Israel. And he has 12 sons who make up these tribes of Israel later on. Now I'm going to skip ahead about 400 years because at the end of Genesis leading up to the next book, Exodus, there's about a 400-year gap. And about 400 years after Jacob or Israel has died, his descendants are enslaved in Egypt, in this land named Egypt. And that's how the book of Exodus starts. And so they're crying out to God, why are we being enslaved? Why aren't we in our own land? Why are all these bad things happening to your people, God? And so God responds. God sends this man named Moses. He takes them out of Egypt. He shows signs from heaven, the plagues to Egypt, and he takes them into the desert to start heading back towards the land that God promised them. And that's where we get to these wilderness wanderings. That's what Exodus through Deuteronomy talks about. The 2nd to 5th book of the Bible talks about what happens in the wilderness as they're going towards this land. And so this 40-day trip, as you'll see, it winds up actually being a 40-year journey because they were disobedient to God, and God punishes them by making them wander around in the desert until that first generation dies off. Here's a map for you to show you exactly how this went. You see Egypt over here on the left, and you follow the red line. That's roughly what historians think that happened, is that they went down to Mount Sinai. That's where the Ten Commandments are given. They go up, and that part where it says Israel is a little ahead of its time, but that's what the land of Canaan is, and that's the land they're trying to get to, is right there. And so, after 40 years, they finally reach this land. They finally reach this land. This next generation has taken over because their parents have died off in the wilderness because they were disobedient. Even Moses doesn't get to go in. And so as we look ahead to what's about to happen, we see that God found this man named Abraham and decided to set up a nation through him. We see that his descendants, the Israelites, wind up enslaved in another land called Egypt. We see God answers their prayer and takes them out of Egypt. They're disobedient to him and spend 40 years wandering through the desert trying to find the land that God promised to them. And now that they're finally there, they're finally at the land, they're looking at it, the question remains, how will the Israelites take this land? Because there's other people there. What's going to happen? How are they going to take this land for themselves? How will they do as a nation? And up until this point, they've just been a people that's roughly been related and has very poor organizational skills. How will they do as a nation once they're free in their own land? Will they actually be faithful to God? Will they actually obey him, unlike they did in the wilderness? Will they make Abraham proud by being faithful to God and listening to him? And will the descendant of Eve ever show up again? In Genesis 3:15, we remember that there's this promised descendant of Eve that's going to destroy evil forever. Apparently, he hasn't shown up yet in the story. When is he going to show up? When is evil finally going to be conquered? How will Israel do? Will they be faithful to the one true God? Or will they do something else? Hope you've enjoyed this. That's a lot of history in one video, and I hope you enjoy the next one just as much. Please subscribe and have a good rest of the day.